That night changed everything. I'd gone to my best friend's house just to hang out like we always did. A few laughs, some old music, the smell of pizza filling the room. But when his father walked in wearing his police uniform, everything in me froze. There was something in the way he looked at me, calm, steady, almost studying me. I tried to ignore it, to laugh it off, to focus on my friend. But every time I turned, his father's eyes were still there. Not harsh, not judgmental, just searching. And when I finally decided to face him, when I stood in front of that man who seemed untouchable, all authority and silence, what I said changed everything between us. What he answered back is something I still think about every single day. Before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. What happened next might make you question everything you thought you knew about honesty, desire, and the courage it takes to tell someone exactly what you feel. It started as an ordinary Friday evening, one of those lazy nights that make you forget the world exists outside your small circle of friends. My best friend Ryan had invited me over to his house for dinner. I'd been there countless times before, so I didn't expect anything different. But that night something felt off. Even before I walked through the door, the sound of rain hit the driveway, and when I stepped inside, I could smell the faint trace of leather polish and aftershave. Something unfamiliar in Ryan's usually chaotic home. His dad was back in town, Officer Grant Holden, the man everyone in our neighborhood seemed to respect or fear. I'd seen him maybe twice before, always in uniform, always carrying that air of confidence that made people step aside when he passed. But seeing him now standing in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, grey in his beard, catching the soft yellow light, it was different. He wasn't just Ryan's dad anymore. He was someone who commanded the room without even trying. "Hey, kid," he said when he noticed me, voice deep and calm. "Haven't seen you around in a while." I nodded, pretending to be unfazed. "Yeah, school's been busy." His gaze lingered longer than it should have. Not intimidating, just observant, like he was trying to figure something out about me. I looked away, my throat tightening for reasons I couldn't explain. Ryan threw a piece of bread at me, laughing. "Don't mind him. He stares at everyone." "Occupational hazard." Grant smirked but didn't deny it. "Cops notice details, son. Can't help it." We all sat down to eat, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced up, his eyes were there, calm, focused, almost curious. He barely spoke, letting Ryan and me carry the conversation. But his silence said more than words could. At one point, Ryan went to grab dessert, leaving the two of us alone at the table. I felt his father's gaze again, and this time I met it. For a second, neither of us looked away. "You're a good friend to my boy," Grant said, his tone softer now. "He doesn't have many who actually look out for him." "Yeah, well, he's easy to care about," I replied. His lips twitched like he wanted to smile, but something else hid behind it. A shadow. "Not everyone would agree. People change when things get hard. You'll see." The words hung in the air, heavy and cryptic. Ryan returned with cake and started joking about his dad being too serious all the time. But the tension didn't disappear. If anything, it got thicker. After dinner, Ryan wanted to play video games in the living room. His dad stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up, sleeves still rolled, the muscles in his forearms flexing slightly as he washed the dishes. I tried not to look, but I did. More than once. And once, when he turned, I caught him watching me through the reflection in the window. Later that night, Ryan fell asleep halfway through a movie. I stayed up, scrolling through my phone, the sound of the rain growing heavier. When I went to grab a glass of water, I found Grant in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe of his office. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Guess not," I said quietly. He nodded toward the living room. "He's out cold, huh?" Yeah, for a moment neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of soap and rain on his skin. "You're different," he said finally. "Most of Ryan's friends barely talk to me." "You don't seem scared." "I don't have a reason to be," I said, trying to sound confident. He tilted his head slightly, eyes scanning my face. Maybe not, but I can tell when someone's hiding something. Something inside me twisted, not fear exactly, but the feeling of being completely seen. I swallowed hard. Maybe you're just overanalyzing. Maybe, he said, his tone low, thoughtful. But I don't think so. Before I could say anything else, Ryan stirred from the couch, calling for me. I turned toward him, and when I looked back, Grant was gone, just the faint sound of a door closing down the hall. That night, I lay awake on the couch, listening to the storm outside. I tried to shake off the feeling that something had changed, that I had crossed into some invisible territory. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The way his gaze lingered, the way his voice dropped when he spoke to me, I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves, just imagination. But deep down I knew I was lying, because that look, the one that started in the kitchen, hadn't left me, and I wasn't sure if I wanted it to. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds and landed across the couch where I had fallen asleep. My back ached, and for a second I forgot where I was. Then I heard the low murmur of voices in the kitchen, Ryan and his dad. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. "Morning, sleeping beauty," Ryan joked, tossing me a cup of coffee as I walked in. "We thought you might never wake up." Grant was standing by the counter, still in his uniform pants, but wearing a plain grey t-shirt now. His hair was damp, probably from a shower, and when his eyes met mine, something inside me stuttered. He gave a small nod, polite but unreadable. "Morning," I said, my voice softer than I intended. Ryan didn't notice anything. He was too busy talking about his plans for the weekend, a camping trip apparently. Grant only half listened, his gaze flicking to me more often than it should have. And every time it did, I felt it like static electricity crawling across my skin. When Ryan left to grab something from his room, the silence between us returned. Grant leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied, sipping the coffee just to have something to do. "Thanks for letting me crash here." "Of course," he said, his tone measured. "You're always welcome." Something in the way he said it made my pulse skip. It was too kind, too personal. I tried to keep my eyes on my cup, but curiosity won. I looked up, and he was already watching me. "You've got a habit," he said, almost smiling. "A habit?" He nodded. "You pretend you're calm when you're anything but." That made me freeze. "You think you can read me that easily?" "I've been reading people my whole career," he said, his voice low. "Most of them lie with their eyes. Yours tell the truth, even when you don't want them to." I didn't know what to say. The air between us felt too thick, too charged. And just when I thought I might find words, Ryan came back in, holding his jacket. "Dad, I'm heading out. You'll drop me off at the station, right?" Grant straightened immediately, that professional composure snapping back into place. "Yeah, let's go." He looked at me for one last second before turning to grab his keys. "You're staying another night?" I hesitated. "If that's okay." He gave the smallest nod. "It's fine. Make yourself at home." When they left, I couldn't focus on anything else. His words replayed in my head. "You pretend you're calm when you're anything but." It felt like he had reached inside and flipped a switch I didn't know existed. That afternoon, rain came again, steady and relentless. The house felt too quiet without Ryan's noise filling it. I wandered through the living room, glancing at the framed photos on the shelves. Grant in uniform, standing next to other officers. In one, he was younger, smiling, his arm around a woman I assumed was Ryan's mother. I'd never met her. Ryan once mentioned she left years ago. No one knew why. I was still staring when I heard the front door open. Grant stepped inside, his jacket soaked, raindrops glistening on his forearms. "Didn't expect it to pour like this," he said, shaking his head. I swallowed hard. Ryan texted. "Said he'll stay at a friend's tonight." Grant raised an eyebrow. "So it's just you and me, huh?" My stomach twisted, not from fear but from something I didn't want to name. "Guess so." He hung his jacket, exhaling deeply. "You hungry?" "Not really." He poured himself a drink, whiskey, just one glass, and leaned against the counter, looking at me again. The silence stretched. Then out of nowhere he said, "You remind me of myself when I was your age." I blinked. "How so?" Quiet, observant, trying to fit into places that never felt made for you. His words hit deeper than I expected. You talk like you know what that feels like. He took a slow sip. Maybe I do. The thunder rolled outside and I realized how close we were standing. His voice had dropped, the distance between us shrinking with every word. You ever get tired of pretending? He asked suddenly. I frowned. Pretending what? That you're not curious about things you shouldn't be. It felt like all the air left the room. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I couldn't tell if he was accusing me or confessing something himself. What makes you think I'm pretending? I managed to ask. His gaze held mine, firm, unblinking. Because I see it. The hesitation, the fear. I've seen that same look in the mirror. I froze. There it was, the thing neither of us had said aloud until now. I didn't know how to respond, and he didn't push it. He just set down his glass and walked past me toward the hallway. Before disappearing around the corner, he said quietly, "Some things you don't have to say out loud for them to be true." The words echoed long after he was gone. I stood there in the dim light, my reflection trembling in the glass of the window. For the first time, I realized that maybe it wasn't just me he'd been studying all along. Maybe he had been fighting his own silence, the same silence that had lived in me for years. And when I finally went to bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about what he'd said, about how close we'd come to crossing a line that neither of us seemed ready to name. Outside, the storm raged harder. Inside, I was just beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, the storm had already started. I woke up the next morning with sunlight cutting through the blinds, slicing the quiet house into gold and shadow. My head felt heavy, my chest tighter than usual. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. The way his voice softened last night. The weight in his gaze when he said he'd seen that same look in the mirror. I told myself I was imagining things, reading too much into the way he talked. But deep down I knew better. Something had changed between us. It was subtle, unspoken, but real, like a live wire humming between two people who hadn't meant to touch it. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. I pulled on my shirt and followed the sound of clinking dishes. Grant was there, already dressed in a black t-shirt and jeans. He looked calmer this morning, almost like last night hadn't happened. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Morning." He poured a second cup of coffee and slid it across the counter toward me. "You heading home today?" "Maybe later," I said, sitting down. "Ryan still hasn't texted." He nodded, taking a sip from his mug. "He'll probably crash there another night." "You know him." I did, but it didn't feel like we were really talking about Ryan. There was a pause too long, a look that lasted just a second too much. My throat went dry. He finally broke the silence. "About last night." My pulse quickened. "Yeah? I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," I said quickly, too quickly. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You're a terrible liar." I wanted to laugh, but instead I looked at him, really looked at him. The way the light hit the lines around his eyes, the faint scar near his jaw, the calm control he carried like armor. He didn't look like the kind of man who lost control of anything. And yet for a moment last night he had. "Grant," I said quietly, my voice barely steady, "were you talking about yourself?" He froze, his hand still on the mug. Then he looked at me, really looked, and it was like time stopped. "I was talking about both of us," he said. The words landed like a heartbeat in the silence between us. He didn't flinch. He didn't try to take them back. He just said them, low and honest, like he'd been holding them in for years. I swallowed hard. "Why tell me that?" He leaned back, eyes steady. "Because I'm too old to keep pretending." There it was again, that raw truth he seemed to carry like a confession. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air felt heavy with everything we weren't saying. Finally, he turned away and said, "I need to check the patrol logs. Be back later." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me staring at the empty space he'd just filled. The day dragged on. I tried watching TV, scrolling through my phone, anything to distract myself. But my mind kept replaying that one moment. I was talking about both of us. By evening, the sky outside turned a deep gray, threatening another storm. When the front door opened, I felt my chest tighten before I even looked up. Grant stepped in, drenched again, rainwater dripping from his hair. He exhaled sharply. "It's coming down hard out there. Power lines might go soon. Want me to grab some candles?" I asked, standing up. He nodded. "Top drawer by the stove." When I turned back, he was closer than I expected, his presence filling the space. The air between us crackled, just like the storm outside. "Can I ask you something?" he said suddenly. "Sure. When you look at me, what do you see?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know. You're my friend's dad. You're a cop. Someone who's hard to read. Try harder, he said, voice low. I stared at him, the flicker of lightning briefly lighting up his face. His eyes weren't cold. They were searching, like he was hoping for an answer he already knew, but was afraid to believe. "I see someone who doesn't let anyone get close," I said finally. "Someone who's tired of being alone." He didn't move for a moment. Then he stepped forward, closing the last bit of distance between us. His breath brushed my cheek. "You shouldn't be able to read me that well," he said. "Maybe I just see the parts you try to hide." Outside, thunder cracked. The lights flickered once and went out. Darkness swallowed the room, except for the faint flashes of lightning through the window. Grant didn't move. Neither did I. The silence felt alive, pulsing with something neither of us could name anymore. "Grant," I whispered, my voice shaking. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "But whatever this is, it's been building for a long time." I could feel the tension breaking like a dam. Every word, every glance from the past few days was rushing back. The unspoken things, the hesitation, the fear. Then, in the dim light of another flash, his hand brushed mine. Just barely. Enough to make my breath hitch. Enough to erase every excuse I had left. He pulled his hand back like he'd touched fire. "I shouldn't." "Then don't stop," I said, my voice trembling. The words slipped out before I could think. And once they did, there was no taking them back. For a moment, he just looked at me, like a man standing on the edge of something dangerous and beautiful. Then he whispered, "You don't know what you're asking for." "Maybe not," I said. "But I know what I feel." The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly he stepped closer again, his voice breaking the darkness. "If I cross this line, there's no going back." My heart was pounding so loud, I thought he could hear it. "Then maybe it's time we stop pretending there's still a line." He exhaled, a sound somewhere between surrender and relief. Outside, lightning struck again. Inside, everything I thought I knew was about to change. The storm outside raged like it was alive, thunder shaking the house as rain slammed against the windows. The lights were still out, and the only glow came from a few candles I'd lit earlier, soft flickers of gold cutting through the shadows. Grant stood just a few feet away from me, but it felt like the space between us was something neither of us could cross without setting fire to everything. He took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling as if the air itself was heavier now. "You don't understand what this could mean," he said quietly. "I think I do," I answered. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. He shook his head. "You're young and I'm—" "Stop," I cut in. "Don't hide behind that." His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something closer to fear, not of me, but of himself. He ran a hand through his damp hair, pacing once, before stopping in front of the window. Lightning illuminated his face for a heartbeat, sharp and beautiful and conflicted. "I've spent half my life keeping control," he said. "Every emotion locked away, every rule followed. And then you walk in here, and suddenly nothing feels simple anymore." I swallowed hard, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Maybe things aren't supposed to be simple." That made him turn. The look in his eyes, torn, desperate, real, made the air between us unbearable. He took one slow step forward, then another. By the time he stopped, I could feel his breath mixing with mine. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" he asked, voice rough. I exhaled shakily. "Maybe the same thing you're doing to me." Something inside him broke then, or maybe it healed. I couldn't tell. But in that silence, I saw it. The exact moment he stopped fighting himself. He reached up slowly, his hand hovering near my jaw but not touching. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "You should tell me to stop," he whispered. "I won't," I said. And then he did what we'd both been pretending we didn't want. He kissed me. It wasn't rushed or careless. It was hesitant, trembling, like two people realizing they'd just crossed into forbidden territory. His hand cupped my neck, and I felt the warmth of his skin, the strength in his touch, the quiet surrender in the way he exhaled against me. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. When he finally pulled back, he stayed close, his forehead resting against mine. "This can't happen again," he said, but his voice didn't sound like he believed it. "Then why did you do it?" I asked softly. "Because I couldn't not." The confession lingered in the air, heavier than the storm outside. I could feel the truth of it in every inch of him, in the way his hands trembled, in the way he looked at me like he was seeing something he'd never allowed himself to want. I stepped back first, trying to breathe. The candlelight flickered between us, shadows moving across his face like pieces of the past he was trying to outrun. "I don't regret it," I said finally. He looked at me then, eyes full of something raw and unguarded. "You will," he said. "When this gets complicated, when people start asking questions, let them ask." He almost smiled, shaking his head. "You think it's that easy?" I think pretending we feel nothing would be worse. The sound of rain filled the silence between us. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no logic strong enough to undo what had just happened. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, then leaned on the counter, his back to me. "I'm not a good man," he said quietly. "I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. You don't need that kind of mess in your life." I walked closer. "Maybe I get to decide what I need." He turned slightly, his jaw tightening. "You don't know what it's like, waking up every day, knowing the world doesn't forgive men like me." That hit me harder than I expected. "You mean men who feel?" His eyes met mine again, and this time they were wet. "Men who love what they were told they shouldn't." I didn't think. I just moved closer, standing beside him, close enough for our shoulders to brush. "Then maybe it's time to stop living by what other people think." He laughed once, quietly, bitterly. "You sound young, and you sound afraid." He turned then, fully facing me again, and for the first time he didn't look like Officer Holden, the man everyone respected. He just looked like Grant, a man who'd been carrying a secret for far too long. "You make it sound like fear is weakness," he said softly. "No," I replied. "I think it's proof that something matters." He stared at me for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, he smiled, the kind of smile that comes after years of silence. "You don't know what you're starting," he said. "Maybe I don't need to," I said. "Maybe I just need to keep going." He took another slow step toward me, stopping just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him. "And if I fall for you, then you won't be falling alone." The lights flickered back on just then, breaking the spell. We both blinked at the sudden brightness, and for a second everything looked too real. The candles, the untouched mugs, the space between us, it all felt like a secret too fragile to survive in daylight. Grant sighed and looked away. "Go get some sleep," he said finally, his voice back to that careful calm. "We'll talk in the morning." But I knew he didn't mean talk. That night I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Every second replayed in my head. The kiss, the words, the way his guard finally dropped. I didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't care, because beneath all the rules, all the fear, all the silence, something real had started, and deep down I knew neither of us could stop it now. The next morning came too fast. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, golden and relentless, as if the universe wanted to remind me that darkness never keeps secrets for long. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in yesterday's clothes, trying to make sense of the night before. Every detail replayed in my head, the warmth of his hand, the sound of his voice breaking, the way he said, "If I fall for you." I wanted to believe it was something beautiful. But the more I thought about it, the more it scared me. Grant wasn't just anyone. He was Ryan's father. He was a police officer, respected, disciplined, the kind of man who built his entire life around control. And I was the one who had cracked that armor. I heard the front door open. My heart jumped before I even looked. Footsteps, 2 pairs this time, Ryan's voice. "Dad, seriously, you could have told me the power went out." "I would have come back," Grant answered, calm as ever. "It wasn't a big deal." I stood up, heartbeat pounding in my ears. I couldn't face both of them, not with the truth sitting on my skin like a bruise. I splashed water on my face in the bathroom, trying to look normal, to erase any trace of what had happened. When I came out, Ryan was already pouring cereal. "Dude, you survived the blackout," he said with a grin. "Dad didn't drive you crazy, huh?" I froze, just for a second, and caught Grant's eyes. His expression didn't move, but his gaze said everything. "Stay calm, yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "He was great company," Ryan chuckled, oblivious. "I bet he probably lectured you about discipline and curfews." Grant turned to the sink, rinsing his mug. "Something like that." I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if his voice actually shook. Ryan plopped onto a chair, scrolling through his phone. "Anyway, I've got to meet the guys from training later. You staying for lunch?" Grant looked at me again, then said evenly, "He's welcome to." My chest tightened. It was the smallest thing, a simple offer, but the look behind it made it feel like a question neither of us could answer out loud. After Ryan left, silence returned to the house like a wave. Grant leaned on the counter, rubbing the back of his neck. "He doesn't suspect anything," he said finally. "Of course he doesn't," I said, though my voice trembled. "There's nothing to suspect, right?" He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "Is that what you really think?" I sighed, staring at the floor. "I don't know what to think." Grant walked closer, each step deliberate. "Then let me make it simple. What happened last night, it wasn't a mistake. But it's dangerous." "I know." He took another step. "If anyone finds out," I said. "I know." I interrupted, my voice sharper than I meant. "But does that mean we just pretend it never happened?" He stopped inches away, his jaw tightening. "Do you want me to pretend?" I hesitated, my throat dry. "No, I just don't want you to disappear." He exhaled slowly, looking at me with that same conflict I'd seen the night before, half desire, half self-preservation. "You have no idea how much I want to stay," he said softly. "But if I do, I'll ruin you." The words cut deeper than I expected. "You think I can't handle this?" "I think you shouldn't have to." The tension hung heavy between us. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, a sound that for him probably meant duty, safety, order. For me, it only reminded me that his life was built on rules I could never belong to. Then the knock came, hard, sharp, unplanned. Grant's face changed instantly, the officer mask snapping back on. He opened the door, and 2 men in uniform stood there. "His colleagues, Captain Holden," one of them said. "We got a report of a disturbance last night." "You lose power out here?" Grant nodded, completely composed. "Yeah, storm knocked out the grid." The younger officer smirked. "Guess it's a good thing you had company, huh?" He gestured toward me with a teasing grin. "Ryan's friend, right? You staying out of trouble?" I froze. Grant's voice came out calm but clipped. "He's fine. Thanks for checking in." The men laughed and walked off, but the moment they were gone, Grant shut the door and pressed his hands against it like he was holding back something heavier than himself. "See," he said quietly. "That's what I mean." I stepped closer. "They didn't suspect anything. Not today," he said. "But people talk. They notice. And what if I don't care?" He turned, eyes blazing. "Then you're not thinking about what it would do to me." That stopped me cold. He wasn't angry because he regretted what happened. He was scared. Scared of losing his reputation, his job, maybe even his son. I softened. "Grant, I don't want to make your life harder. But you can't keep pretending you're fine." His shoulders dropped. He looked older suddenly, like the weight of his silence had finally caught up to him. "You make me forget how careful I'm supposed to be," he said. "And that terrifies me." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, watching him battle himself. Finally, he looked up again. "I have a patrol shift tonight," he said quietly. "When I get back, we'll figure this out." "Figure what out?" "What this is," he said. "And if we can survive it." He grabbed his jacket and left, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. like the whole house was holding its breath. Hours passed. The rain stopped. The night deepened, and then sometime after midnight the phone rang. It wasn't Grant, it was the station. An accident. A call gone wrong. They said he'd been injured during a confrontation. A suspect pulled a knife. They said he was alive but unconscious. I dropped the phone. The world around me blurred into noise and light and fear. All the things we hadn't said, all the things we tried to hide, they crashed into me at once. And as I ran out into the night, heart-pounding, one truth burned through the panic. I couldn't lose him. Not before he knew what he meant to me. Not before I told him the one thing I'd been too afraid to say.